Okay guys, welcome back to the channel. Going to do a video today kind of wrapping up my subwoofer series, and it's not really meant to be a review of the REL 25, but since that's my recent purchase, which kind of spurned the series, I'll give my thoughts on the REL 25 for anybody considering that, and maybe let's just jump into that first. I'll reiterate, as I said in a previous video, it's probably the best purchase I ever made, even though it's one of the more expensive ones. It retails for like $7,500. The difference it makes, the delta between just the sub that was just there, which was a highly regarded Vandersteen sub, I think retail for over $2,000 or somewhere around that range. Highly regarded, very fast, 3 8-inch drivers. It's night and day difference from even that level. And I've had the smaller RELs as well. So coming from nothing to this sub, the delta would be immense. So is it worth it? If you've got the budget, I think it's worth it for anybody to consider. And especially when you see what's being spent in some systems on things like cables, tweaks, even a lot of servers. As you saw in my server video, a lot of these servers that you get for the money, what's under the hood is almost nothing. You know, it's just a modified laptop PC parts, not even high quality like here. But and it's sound quality difference, even if you do spend a lot for like my server, it still won't make the delta difference of sound as the REL 25. Now the server does have UI improvements and other things that'll help you. And to that end, it's very important because your server as well can help with room correction with parametric EQ and room and other things you can do. But I don't want to get too sidetracked off of that. I'm just basically saying that when your budget comes to what you want to upgrade, if you don't have a sub, that's something you want to consider. Even if you can't afford a REL 25 sub, there are different levels to this game, you know, but 75% of what you get with your sub is going to be related to setup. And if you can set up even a budget sub well, you will notice an enhancement in your performance, especially in the bass area, because the sub, if set up well, could help alleviate some peaks and nulls at your listening position that is probably occurring right now if you just have 2 floor standers. No matter how good those floor standers are, and no matter how good your room is, unless you've got a ton of bass traps, and I've got 6 in here, but most people can't even get 2 bass traps in their room or 4, and without having aesthetic issues or wife accepted factor or just cost. So you're going to have peaks and nulls in the bass region, and without a sub to be able to move that or ability to move your listening position, it's going to be hard to cancel those out and mitigate those problems. So 1 sub or 2 sub can just enhance the performance of your main speakers by evening out the bass. Now, that extra 25% though, when you get to level of quality of build, driver quality and power and box size and just the physics of what this can do, that 25% is super important when you get to that level. So will you hear a difference between this REL 25 and 2 smaller REL subs? Absolutely. 100% of the time, blind test 100% of the time, you'll get it right. Like I said, even compared to the Wilsons, the Vandersteen that I had in that corner, same, it would be an easy A-B comparison. Even compared to some of the higher end subs I've heard in the past, from hundreds of rooms at shows, NBL Extreme towers. Now, obviously, for different room sizes, you may need more of these RELs, but this to me had the performance that I've not really heard before from a sub. And it's hard to describe the difference that really made me, want to buy this. But when I was in that room in San Antonio, it wasn't even an ideal listening environment. There was lots of rattles. It was a house he was renting at the time, so he hadn't had all the treatments and all that put in either of the rooms where he had the REL 25s. But there was just a distinct nature to the bass and the sound and the speed and the tightness that is something that I just never heard before across all spans of different types of subs. It's not even type that really probably matters. It's just the complete design. And that's one thing I want to point out. Don't get dogmatic and always saying, okay, open baffle is the best sub, sealed box the best sub. ported, transmission line, whatever, servos. It's all about the implementation. I've had servo sealed box subs that were terrible. I've had, my friend Doug has a great one, a rhythmic one that's a sealed box, really good. I've heard open baffle ones that are really good, like the one that Danny Ritchie's house, and I had a video on that. Really good sub, especially for the money. You know, that's killer. There's even some ported ones that you can make with your system pretty good. So it's not dogmatic that you want to be you want to see implementation and how it's designed and track record for reliability. A lot of these plate amps on these subwoofers fail. I just came from a room where a guy had $14,000 subs. They both failed. You know, that's just ridiculous. So again, don't get dogmatic. I don't have enough history with the REL 25 to know about the reliability aspect, but I will say that I am happy with the dealer I bought it from, and as well my experience with REL, that I feel comfortable I'll be treated right if anything occurs. Now, not to be a total fanboy, the few things that I will ding the REL 25 on if I have my druthers. Number one, there is a little noise when the display comes on. If you're changing volume or when it first kicks on, when nothing's playing, you can hear a noise coming from the driver with the display on, which should never happen with a reference level piece of equipment, even budget level piece of equipment. So something probably is not totally done perfectly inside with the electronics that's picking up that noise. They should address that. It shouldn't happen. It does go away totally when the display stops. So it's not an issue in terms of for 99% of the time, but it's just something you don't like to see with a very high-end piece like that. And I think it goes back to what I mentioned in a previous video with their parametric EQ that's in there. I would ding them and say that should be an option like their wireless thing for the sub. I think it should just be an option to put in that parametric EQ. It really doesn't do a lot for somebody that has an extensive parametric EQ already and using software and wants something more robust, which reference level people are not going to just use the primitive parametric EQ in this box. So I would say I'd like that to go away, and I think that'll do away with a lot of the issues with the noise. And also, I think I had mentioned in a previous video, I had a hum originally with this, and I didn't have it with the sub that was there before, using the exact same power cord and the same interconnect to get to the signal there. I was able to get rid of it, but again, it was more sensitive to ground loop than previous sub in that exact same spot. And I think it was due to, if you look under the hood of the REL 25, there is a parametric EQ and the electronics are right on the inputs. And I did notice a difference in quality of the inputs in terms of addressing that. So I think they do need to spend a little more time addressing those two aspects. But it's kind of nitpicking because at the end of the day, I got rid of the hum, and the noise from the display is not an issue once it goes off in the first 15 seconds or so. So other than that, it's just a killer piece, and if you can afford it, you will hear the difference 100% of the time from almost any sub you put it up against. It's just that good from, you know, my experience and visiting hundreds of rooms over the years with different subs. It's a unique animal. But the whole purpose of my subwoofer series isn't really to give a review of the REL 25. It's also to share how important it is to properly integrate a sub, because just as many of those rooms I just talked about, the subs probably were a lot better than what I heard because they just weren't set up right. And you can kind of tell they got room boom, and you can tell when sometimes there's a cancellation at the listening position. That's a very frequent problem. And so there's no point in buying this sub or even other subs unless you're going to go through the effort to set it up properly. You could just as easily make things worse with a sub than you do making it better. So always go into buying a sub with the understanding that, number one, it could have as big an impact positive as buying a whole new set of speakers, and for all types of music, not just bass music. It just pays off. But if you don't invest the time, you could just as easily be muddying things up and creating more problems as well. And that will bring me to kind of the next step of what I wanted to talk about. Was a couple of feedback. You know, people wanted to know about REL stacking. What do they think about that? And let's talk about that real quick. Stacking the subs does have some merit because they will couple to the floor a little bit differently, but I'm not a big fan of stacking unless you've already got two positions for the sub that are your first two subs that are ideal. To me, the benefit of multiple subs is that it helps you address those cancellations I was talking about and peaks at your listening position. When you spread them out, it ends up evening out the bass response and helping to negate those issues that might occur right at your listening position. And unless you've got subs spread out in a manner that cures that problem or at least mitigates it significantly, there's no point in stacking them in the wrong spot. So, and then quite frankly, when you see a lot of these stacks of subs, they are mainly done, as you can probably tell, for aesthetic purposes, not for, performance purposes, because they're symmetrical and no room is symmetrical. Like one of the advantages and disadvantages I have of this room is aesthetically, it's not that great and it's small, but I've already written off the potential of this ever looking that great. Everything I do in here is strictly for performance. If it doesn't look good, I don't care. If it looks oblong or offset, it doesn't matter to me because the room itself is offset, and then you have different surfaces with a brick wall on one side, doors on the other, window here, and that's how most rooms are. So keeping things symmetrical for aesthetic purposes and visual purposes looks nice, but it's not always what ends up translating to your listening position as best and with your measurements. Sometimes the room treatments have to be, not symmetrical. Sometimes the positioning has to be not symmetrical. There's a lot of variety of things that can go on to for performance over aesthetics, and sometimes that's not possible. So don't buy a REL stack or any stack of subs if they're in the wrong position. If you can get them in the right position and then stack them, then you can gain some of the benefits. But I've just found the stacking to be not a huge advantage for the extra cost that's involved. And let's talk about one of the disadvantages. In a lot of cases, you've got to be more meticulous with your crossover points of the stack and getting them to seamlessly blend so that you don't locate them. And the problem is these stacks of subs are going to be moving a lot of air. And these are mechanical devices. So just from a mechanical air moving standpoint, it makes it more locatable from your listening position, depending on how large your room is, how far away you are. So you're going to have to be very meticulous with your setup to make sure that you don't localize the subs and you don't overload the room with room boom and other things. So again, I do not put a lot of stock into the stacking array method unless you have ideal positions for the first two and you have a big enough room where it won't cause any downsides. And you have the time to invest in rolling each one off properly like, REL does espouse. So, I'm not telling you anything that people that espouse stacking don't advise, but it's a lot of work. And in a room like this, I'll never be stacking. I don't need that. So I'm getting flat bass response. Really amazing. I've never had that. Pretty much flat bass response all the way through and well past the crossover point. And I've never been able to get that. But it's due to the fact I put a lot into the room treatments. I got 6 bass traps in this room, which my other room is prettier looking, but I can only get about 2 or 3 bass traps in there. It's not enough. I need more. But aesthetically, it's just not going to work. So, yeah, you need to invest in your room for these subs to be optimally performed. But if you can't, if you're like I was, early on, get 1 or 2, see how much you can improve the performance of your main 2, and go from there. There's different stages to this game. You don't have to jump into this immediately. And it's a little bit fun to go through that progression versus just throwing this in your system and hoping it's going to work. Take some time to learn. That's part of the fun thing. Experience, as much as I talk to you about it, your own experience and your own ears, translating what I say to reality is really what's going to pay off. You're going to realize, oh yeah, that's exactly what he said. But hearing it yourself is very important. So go through that experience, embrace it. If you can't afford these right off the bat, understandable. Not many people can. Most of my career never would have thought of buying a $7,500 sub. But now that I did, I can say, well worth it. So I think that covers almost everything I wanted to cover with the REL and subs in general. I will say one other thing that may come up is mixing and matching subs is not always that bad of an idea. In fact, one of the dealers in New Orleans that I used to go to tipped me off on this at one time, that sometimes it's okay to mix and match subs from not the same brand or same model number, depending on how your room is and how you set it up. And I found with this SVS, still using that one, it's a sealed box, pretty good. It does help cure any room issues further. And so don't be afraid of that. And if you think about it, even REL's methodology of, I don't do it, but hooking it up to the amp such that your main speakers and the REL sub perform at the same frequencies, is basically saying using two different, it's almost the same, it's not worse than using two different brand subs, because your main speakers are going to be playing the same frequencies as your subwoofer, and that's two different types of drivers. It's even more drastic with your floor standers versus another sub like an SVS compared to this. So even in REL's own advice, they're not espousing that logically it doesn't make that much a difference from their logic to mix and match drivers playing the same frequency. I think it is ideal to roll off your main speakers and have this doing most of the bass for the reasons I outlined in previous video. And ideally, if you can get matched subs, that's probably the safer way to go. But don't be afraid of it if you have budget concerns early and you're just progressing like everybody does, piecemeal. It can work. You just gotta put a little more work to make it work better. All right, guys, hopefully you found that helpful. I'm also going to be doing some audio tracks, but not just of the REL 25. That video I did with the Avalon ISIS room and spectral gear was pretty popular. Excuse me. And those songs I thought would be cool to play on the MBL Extremes at 3MA, as well as my systems here. Because not only have I introduced this REL sub, since I probably last did audio tracks for the channel, but I did some things to want to make my vocal performance match that of the Avalon. And so I'll go over both at the same time, because bass, you're not going to really hear that much from a cell phone video. And so I'm not going to really be able to showcase too much for you there. But some of the things I did to enhance my vocals, now that I heard a new benchmark for vocal performance, really paid off. So I'll share those with you in a future video. So stay tuned, subscribe, sign up for notifications, and we'll see you soon.